You're listening to the Deep Purple Podcast, a fan podcast about one of the most legendary bands of all time, Deep Purple. We take a look at the music, history, and people behind the band Deep Purple and beyond. Welcome to the Deep Purple Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Beaudry, and with me today I have my good friend and co-host, John Matola. How you doing, John?
Hola.
If you want to keep up to date on the show, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcatcher. You can also subscribe on YouTube or on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and then also you can check our website, deeppurplepodcast.com. So if you like what you hear, and you want to support the show, you can become a patron on Patreon, and also you can leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts that lets new people discover the show. And it came out this week, I guess, that they're getting rid of Apple Podcasts or iTunes, I guess they're getting rid of. And they're going to split it into like a few different, I guess they're going to split it into music, podcasts, and I think there's one other, or apps, I guess. So, and iTunes is going to go away.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I don't know what that means. I hate iTunes, like the music player iTunes, so I'll be happy to see that go away. But
yeah, I haven't used it in years myself, so
I use it like just kind of to sync my phone and everything with stuff because there's not really any other option with an iPhone. Well, unless you just use like Spotify, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so I guess
primarily that's what I use anymore. I have a
Well, that's funny because growing up, you were the one that was like, I've got too many cassettes, I'm not getting CDs, and I like was ahead of the curve, and now like I'm listening to not CD, like I'm listening to all my CDs that I ripped onto my computer. And when I moved to New York, I had like 2,000 CDs or something, and leading up to there, just like every day I'd rip like 20 more CDs and just throw them on my computer. So when I moved to New York, I went completely CD free. That would have been like 2004.
Yeah.
And I've just been listening to that ever since. And then now you've leapfrogged me into the streaming services world.
Yeah, I mean, I'm well aware that I guess to a more discerning ear than mine, the sound quality is terrible by most audiophiles' accounts. But for my money, I don't notice the difference, and I prefer the convenience. And I'm just not. I guess I just don't care enough. I'm not like focused enough on that kind of audio yet, so it works for me.
Audio files, I mean, that's such a bunch of garbage anyway. Like I have no problem. Like I ripped all my CDs back at like 160 kbps because like at the time it was like, I might not have enough hard drive space. Now it's like not a factor. Even with like, I think I have enough music on my, it says at the bottom of iTunes, it's like, 895 days, it'll say at the bottom, like how long you could listen to it before it starts back up to the top. So, it doesn't even matter, but like, that's like, nobody can tell, especially the way that we're listening to this stuff. If you had a $7,000 stereo system, maybe you'd be able to detect like a small variance in quality, but if you're listening to it on your phone, in your car, and your headphones, like you're not going to be able to tell.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not part of the 1% that has a $7,000 stereo, so I'm fine with it.
Who has a stereo anymore anyway? Like, are you going like a component stereo that you're like?
God, I don't know.
Like, I don't even like when somebody gives me a CD, I'm like, what the heck am I going to do with this? I had to buy. Like, I don't even put CD players in my computer anymore. I bought like a little USB CD player, so I can just plug that in and rip something in the rare case I get a CD or a DVD.
Yeah, I get you.
But anyway, enough of that. That was old man grumpy talk with John and Nate. So this week we've had a few really good updates for the show, and some stuff I'd like to share with you. And right now we've got, let's see if I can find this here. I'm getting used to my, here we go. Getting used to my screen thing here. It's been a week. We've got a comment on YouTube. Said, I thought about suggesting you do a comparison of The Bird Has Flown with Evan Simper versus the Gillen Glover version of Bird Has Flown. So the version with Gillen Glover is on Spotify, BBC session 68 to 70. He says, I like both versions. Was actually unsure if Gillen or Evan's first time. I heard the Gillen one until somewhere in the middle where he puts an unmistakable signature on it. So have you heard the Gillen Glover version?
Nope.
No, he posted this, but I still never, I didn't really check it out, but it's worth looking into.
Yeah, definitely. I'd like to hear that. That's one of the things that I would love is like to hear something besides Hush with the two of them on it. Bird Has Flown would be a very interesting one.
And don't they do like Gillen does Hush? Well, they play Hush occasionally. They played it, I think, at their induction of the Hall of Fame.
Well, even early on the when we were talking about the album that we're going to be discussing today, I did listen to the 2002 reissue that has like the extra songs on it. One of them was Hush, and it sounded kind of similar, but not really. If that makes any sense.
I didn't actually listen to that version. What was the difference?
Ian Gillan. I mean, he kind of sang in the low register, but like kind of like more toward the choruses and everything. He threw in a couple of his signature, vocal screams and a little bit, and then it's like, okay, but I mean, it was obviously you could tell it was him, but at first it kind of sounded similar, I guess. A little bit. It was really weird too, because I hadn't really heard that, at least in a while, or them do it so fresh from like changing the lineup,
Yeah, I'll need to check that one out at a later date. Mike Healy, who comments on a lot of really great comments, he posted this picture. He found this on eBay, which is a copy of Shades of Deep Purple signed by everyone except for Rod Evans, because I think a copy signed by Rod Evans would be pretty much non-existent. But this was, I guess everyone had signed it back in the 70s except Nick Simper. So the seller has a photo of Nick Simper signing it in 2012.
Cool.
Along with it. So that's really cool. I think to get our one complete with Rod Evans would be crazy.
Well, you have to track him down first.
Yeah, that's
and then nobody seems to know where he is, so that's
it'd take you 12 months and a private investigator to track him down. He'd be like, I'm not signing that life is behind me, kid. We got Pot of Thunder recommending us, which is awesome, because they had we talked last week about how they reviewed Getting Tighter, and I listened to quite a few more of their episodes. They're really, really, really great shows and really funny. But he had recommended us. He recommended Sabbath Bloody Podcast and Skinnerd Podcast, which I want to get into too, which is really cool. So
that's cool.
This Skinnerd Podcast is called Skinnerd Reconsidered. And you can see how it's spelled there, Reconsidered. And we had a little back and forth because he knows nothing about Deep Purple, and I know less than nothing about Leonard Skinnerd. Unless you count knowing Sweet Home Alabama and Freebird, that's pretty much the extent. And I think they had 3 guitarists, and I know there was a plane crash, which is terrible. But that's about all. Do you know any Skinnerd?
Yeah, what you said. I'm a very casual when it comes on the radio or those kind of few facts that you threw out. That's all I know.
Well, it's interesting because he's very like self-aware of the kind of preconceived notions of Leonard Skinnerd. He's from the South. I don't know if he says where he's from. I only listened to the first episode so far. He's from the South. He kind of talks about some of those, racial overtones. He really sets it in the first episode. He's like, hey, I'm not into any of this sort of stuff. He says some stuff that would probably piss off a lot of Skinnerd fans right off the bat. And he kind of talks about his love and hate relationship with the band, which I think is really cool. and the relationship with his father and his father getting him into Skinner. And I guess they only had 5 albums prior to the plane crash. And he goes through he's really bite-sized episodes, like 20-minute episodes, talks about the song. And the first song he played was awesome. The first song off their first album, I was like, wow, I got to listen to some Skinner, because, you hear these songs on the radio against your will, and you're just like, you kind of almost block them out.
Yeah.
Or don't pay attention. So that's pretty cool. We had some kind of little back and forth about our shows, which was great.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I had have you had any more interaction with Pot of Thunder aside from them mentioning us?
No, not really.
Because I mentioned them in a Instagram story promoting their episode about Deep Purple,
Yep.
just to and tagged us in it as well. And so we messaged each other very briefly back and forth on Instagram. And I just told them, like, I had listened to, after you had mentioned them last week, that episode, and I thought, like, everything. I was in tears, like, when they were talking about Coverdale.
Stuff about Coverdale is so great.
Because it's like, no, it's just nothing. Like, it's not. I don't think anything is really based in facts. It's just like stuff that they heard about him, just their commentary or what the preconceived notions about him are. And these guys are just like, they're just saying all this stuff. Like, if there's like a instrumental going on, Coverdale just goes off to the side of the stage and just looks down at his crotch and smiles while they're jamming. And it's like, what? And so I was listening to some back episodes, and I have to say, if anybody wants to hear anything, you don't even have to like Kiss, because it's, even when they do the Kiss songs, they go off on these tangents, which are so funny. I think the one that I told you about the other day is they were just like going through a Kiss song, and then they got off on a 10-minute long tangent about the origins of German chocolate cake. And I'm just like, what the hell is happening right now? But it was hilarious. It's like, you don't even realize that they do it. And then you're like learning about German chocolate cake or something like that. And it's just the commentary is just, it's worth it, because they have like these very distinct personalities. And one of the guys, who I think his name is Chris, just has this really
delivery is
just hysterical.
And just he can string together a sentence just to pick the perfect words to just guarantee to make you laugh.
Oh yeah.
I don't, the other guy's name I forget. Is it? It's not Andy. Is it Andy?
I can't. I've only heard.
I know they have that little thing, but yeah, I apologize to Pot of Thunder, but I don't know how he holds it together as much as he does, because that guy is just, wow. I mean, they're both really funny. It's a great show.
Yeah, and that's definitely a benchmark to if we could review albums like they do.
Or song, yeah, that's just a song, and it's, I mean, it's, well, because the actual song portion of it is only maybe 20 to 25, 30 minutes, but it's a lot of great discussion. The episode they posted today, I'm almost done with it, and it's about a Michael Schenker group, or Michael Schenker and
UFO
Macaulay or Macaulay.
Oh, okay.
Which I'm not very familiar with his work, but it's fun. Like, Getting Tighter, I was like almost nervous, like, are they gonna like it? And they really liked it. And honestly, I think it would be hilarious hearing a review of trashing it. Either way, it'd be funny. But this one, they're really trashing the Michael Schenker. It's something from like the late 80s, really going for that, like, trying to jump on that White Snake train, going for that style. But anyway, it's a really great show. You should definitely check out Pot of Thunder.
Absolutely.
If you want to listen to a podcast that's been around a lot longer than us, and probably has
a lot funnier. It's a lot funnier than us, or at least we think we're funny. I don't know if anybody else does.
Yeah, sometimes some things are funny. So this is a tweet from Terry Mathley, T-Bone's Prime Cuts. Does like this radio show, or I guess a radio show, and he kind of like posts songs. He'll like kind of live tweet them, and it's really cool. But he gave us some reviews, and he says he hasn't really listened to much of the podcast. He's actually recovering from a surgery and such, so he hasn't listened to too much, but he's looking forward to catching up on some of us. So like most people, he's kind of waiting for the Mark II lineup. So yeah, we're gonna have some pressure on us after this episode, even though this is technically Mark II. And then the big news of the week, David Coverdale retweeted us.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was just a real thrill getting a retweet by David Coverdale. He follows no one. He follows 0 people. He tweets about 400 times a day. And he has the craziest like Twitter style, if you want to call it. Like he posts, like he doesn't use emojis, but he uses like old school emoticons. So if he likes something, he'll put a smiley face. If he really likes, he'll put like smiley face ×2. Or sometimes he'll post something that's like a funny meme, and he'll write encore. He just it's such a weird like, I only started following him like this week, and it's just almost like I opened Twitter and I'm scrolling through 100 David. Like, how does this guy as prolific as him have time to tweet as much as he does? It's insane. But he commented, which was really, really amazing that he did that. And then that was a few days ago, a post I put about John Lord's Windows album that David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes participated on. And then today he retweeted us again, which was awesome. I posted, it was the anniversary of his Unplugged performance with Adrian Vandenberg.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever seen that one live in Tokyo?
I've heard it. I haven't seen like video of it or anything.
The video is weird because it's like, it looks like he's in like a lobby of a hotel with like the plants against the wall and stuff. Very odd, but man, what a performance. Like, to just have, you got a guy playing the guitar and a guy singing, and that's, you got to be good to pull that off. You're not hiding behind anything. And of course it's freaking David Coverdale. So what a voice he's got. So I posted that, and he talked about Unzipped, which is one of their little compilation albums where they remastered that particular version. And I posted just a video of them doing Soldier and Fortune, which was really cool. So that's kind of all we got for updates for the week. Well, I guess that's enough. But another thing is Candace Knight also retweeted one of our things, and that got us like hundreds of likes and comments and stuff. So we just cracked 100 followers about 5 minutes before we started recording. So
yay, thanks.
Up about 50 followers from last week. So
hey, it's something.
Yeah, it's slowly getting, and like I've said before, the amount of engagement is really the important thing. There's so much engagement, so many comments, so many people telling stories of what the music means to them, and it's just like, it's really encouraging to see there's that many people that love this music. So
yeah, cool.
So with that, we're going to get to the album at hand, and I thought we would do something a little different. Well, we have a little history to go through, of course. This wouldn't be the Deep Purple podcast without a little history lesson, but I thought we would just watch the actual concert and not just listen to it. Because this unlike, I guess, any other Deep Purple album, or maybe probably any other album we'll talk about on the show, this one has the benefit of having been recorded live with video cameras for TV. So we can actually, rather than just listening to it, we can watch the performance, which if you're listening to this in a podcast won't mean much to you, except you might hear us talking about specific visuals going on. But if you're watching on YouTube, you're in for a treat.
But yeah, the visuals are what really, I think, make it. At least they did for me. Like, I don't know if I got the album first or if I saw the video. I probably got the album first, and then I got like a bootleg or something of it on VHS. But like, watching the performance was just kind of the coolest part.
My first memory of this is being in your basement and you just whipping out this VHS and being like, check out what I got. And when we were both, well, I don't want to say both started, but we were both starting to really explore Deep Purple more. And you introduced me to all this kind of underbelly of Deep Purple I never knew. I had this very narrow scope. And that's one of the first things you showed me, I think even before you showed me that Copenhagen, I wanted to say DVD, but they did not exist then. That must have been also a bootleg VHS that you got at that place on Route 44, I think, that sold bootlegs. And so I remember you whipped that out and and put that in the VCR, and I was just like, oh my God, I couldn't believe that this has happened. And I watching the visuals, and I find like when you watch like a video or a live performance of something before you actually hear the music, you're always kind of, that's your first impression, and you're always kind of got that impression in your mind. And I've always had a real, I know some parts of this are difficult for a lot of fans, but I've always had a real soft spot for this album. So that being said, getting into it, we've got, we talked about in the last episode, in episode 6, Ian and Roger joining the band before Nick and Rod left and recording the song Hallelujah, which gets released as a single with the song April as the B-side, even though April was recorded with Rod Evans and Nick Simper, which had to be a little weird.
I think it's funny. They recorded a single behind their backs. They sneak them into the studio. They're just like, I don't know.
I can't think of an analog for that in the modern or in any era of I guess the closest thing would be that I can think of is the Beatles had on one of their early first singles. I think George Martin had brought in a session drummer because he wasn't sold on Ringo, and just kind of the devastation Ringo felt. However, Ringo was allowed to stay in the band and be in the band and record on all the rest of their music for the most part, unless Paul McCartney was doing his drums over in secret. So, but other than that, I can't think of many times when like a band would just, it's like they had an affair. They cheated on Rod and Nick. It's such a weird scenario.
Yeah.
They weren't broken up yet, but so Ian and Roger leave episode 6 officially in July of 1969, and the concerto was recorded in September. So you're talking just a matter of not even 12 weeks, I don't think, between the two.
Yeah.
Sheila Carter Dimmick from episode 6 said in an interview that she viewed the breakup as inevitable. She said that in a quote from the book, The Road of Golden Dust, she says, sooner or later, someone was going to see this good-looking guy with a great voice, oozing charisma, and snap him up. In Ian Gillan's autobiography, he seems to say she was a little angrier than that. But that's what she's recorded as saying. There was, as we talked about, a little bit of a legal battle between Gloria Bristow, the manager of episode 6, and the Deep Purple management. They settled that for $3,000. Nick Simper was furious with the way that this went down, gets lawyers involved. He ends up going with a 10,000 pound settlement. And this is in lieu of any royalty deal moving forward with the band. So it sounds like he had a really bad deal or a bad lawyer. Or I guess it's hindsight. If the band had just gone nowhere, that would have been a great deal. But I think he left a lot of money on the table.
Well, I mean, if he knew now what he knew then, I mean, back then he probably thought like they didn't go anywhere after 3 albums in 18 months or whatever. So it could have been anybody's game. I mean, they really weren't anybody. They weren't anything. So he probably thought, yeah, this is a good deal. But if he flashed forward from now back then, he'd probably be like, damn it.
Yes. Well, playing the odds, I'm sure that was the smart move, but
yeah,
so it goes.
But ultimately it was not.
So one of the things I read about this development in this time period was that reporters weren't quite sure what to make of the sound that Deep Purple was developing. Not just Deep Purple, other bands too. And they were started calling it progressive rock, which was interesting to me. Like, you know, we've heard of progressive rock or prog rock, but you don't think of Deep Purple as prog rock. Kind of like in the early 90s, like everything that was not hair metal was alternative.
Mm-hmm.
It was either hip hop or if it had guitars, it was alternative, you know, because they didn't have big hair. And that didn't really make any sense because you had a band like Soundgarden was alternative, but Nirvana was also alternative, you know, and I mean, God, Soundgarden was more closer to hair metal than they were alternative. But so that kind of seemed to fade as we get like more into the 70s. Prog rock develops a very technical, what they call like math metal now, you know, very like odd time signatures and long extended orchestrated jams and things like Dream Theater and things like that would evolve from that. So anyway, things are gearing up. In this time, John Lord says in an interview that we believe in experiment and excitement. We were trying to develop unnaturally before. We'd grasp at all sorts of different ideas at once, like a child in a garden full of flowers. He wants them all at once. When Ian and Roger joined, something very nice happened with the group. So that sets the stage for where we're going to go with the concerto, which was eventually released in December of 1969 by Tetragrammaton in the US, and then in January in the UK. John Lord, and as we talked about before, in the UK, this came out before the Deep Purple album to add further confusion. So John Lord says the history of this is he had heard Bernstein plays Brubeck plays Bernstein. So it was like Leonard Bernstein conducting Dave Brubeck's band. And when he was in the Artwoods, he really wanted to do that sort of thing. They tried to line something up a few times, but it just kind of fell through. There'd been a lot of bands that tried to fuse classical and rock. There was Nero and the Gladiators in 1961 did a version of Hall of the Mountain King. And in 1965, Blackmore, when he was in Richie Blackmore, his group called the Lancaster, tried to do a version of this as Dave Edmunds' band Love Sculpture, which I think is a pretty good name for a band, had done an arrangement of the Saber Dance. And so there've been a few like little things. And then we even talked about last week about episode 6 doing Mozart versus the rest. So this kind of thing was starting to pop up, but putting an actual band and an orchestra on the same stage was a little bit new. Keith Emerson had done something sort of similar the previous year, which I can put a link to in the show notes. There's like there's a recording of it, though it doesn't quite strike the same chord as what we're talking about today. So the head of the new label that Deep Purple is in, Malcolm Jones, was really encouraged with the Hallelujah Signal. It apparently didn't do anything as far as sales, but it got a lot of good press and positive press, so we really wanted to jump on that. And John Lord had been talking about doing this concerto for a while, and then one day Tony Edwards walks in, one of the managers for Deep Purple, and says, "Hey, you know that concerto you've been talking about? Well, I booked the Royal Albert Hall in September, so we're going to do it." And then John Lord's like, "Okay, now I guess I got to write a concerto." So it's kind of like his bluff had been called. So they got Malcolm Arnold to conduct, who was one of the most well-respected conductors in all of London, and that was it. He had 6 months to write this concerto, get it out there. This was before Rod and Nick even left the band. So this is April. Ian and Roger come in about the halfway point between the two, and then after they join, they're writing and recording in rock and writing and getting ready to record the concerto. So that's
pretty nuts.
I can't even imagine the pressure that must have been on John Lord at this point. And as we'll get into, the rest of the band are kind of assholes to him through this whole process because they're upset about this direction.
Especially Richie.
Especially Richie. Although it's funny because Ian Gillan kind of is pretty outspoken about it too, considering he'd only been in the band for a few weeks. He hadn't even been in the band as long as this concept. So few little quick notes about Malcolm Arnold, because I found him to be really interesting. He's born in 1921. He would have been 47 when he conducted this, and John Lord was 28. So pretty young for John Lord. I had not written any concertos by the age of 28. I've written many by now, but so Malcolm Arnold started playing the trumpet when he was 12. He was inspired by Louis Armstrong, and by 1943 he became the principal trumpet player in the London Philharmonic. During World War II, he registered as a conscientious objector, and he was still put into the National Rifle Service. I'm not sure how that works. He ended up having to go into a military band, and to get out of the army, he shot himself in the foot. Kind of gotta admire the guy. He returned to the London Philharmonic until 1948. Then he retired to become a full-time composer, and ends up being one of the biggest composers in Britain. Did tons of successful compositions for movies. He did the full movie score for The Bridge Over the River Kwai. and numerous other movies. So this is the guy that people kind of went to in situations like this. According to an article from the Daily Mail, by 1961, he'd had a reputation for being frequently drunk and highly promiscuous. I'll put a link in the show notes, but they kind of paint a picture of him. Had a lot of mental health issues. He ended up being hospitalized after 2 suicide attempts. He eventually overcame depression. They gave him 1 year to live, but he lived another 22 years, and he died at 84 in 2006.
Wow.
And he was knighted in 1993. So some interesting notes about Mr. Arnold.
That's the most I've ever learned about him.
Yeah, just know, and you'll see soon in the video, as you remember, he's a very animated guy.
Yeah.
Just kind of almost a caricature of what you'd expect somebody conducting an orchestra to be like.
Yeah.
So as we lead up to the concerto, Ian Gillan's not happy with the project. He was quoted as saying, Roger and I, being the new boys, were thinking, what's going on here? Are we a rock band or a classic rock gimmick band? A classical rock gimmick band. Blackmore was also really against the concerto. He wanted to go more in this hard direction. Malcolm Arnold had seen some pages about this from John Lord's score, and he got really excited about it. And he ends up sitting down with John Lord and helping him figure out how to score this, because John Lord had never scored anything this elaborate before. This was going to be recorded on TV. It was going to be a very good move for the band. Roger Glover, in the documentary Roger Glover Made in Wales, he talks about the lead up to this and how they were only in the band for a few weeks, and that just saying that he said he felt like he was completely out of his depth doing this. Like he's in, he goes from a struggling band playing, little clubs in Beirut to being on the floor of the Royal Albert Hall performing live with a full orchestra backing. I feel like I could have maybe mentally at his age gotten through that, but now it scared me to death.
Yeah.
I think at that age you're just like, oh, whatever. I'll just power through it. And I think I would die of stress leading up to that. So, they had, again, the label struggling at this point. They're trying to release the Deep Purple album, but they're having all this backlash in America because of the crazy, naked images on the back of the album. This is the same label that had released John Lennon and Yoko Ono's Two Virgins album, and they had to put it in a paper bag to sell it. So they're kind of like thinking of doing the same thing with Deep Purple. And as we talked about, the Deep Purple album got terrible sales. So John Lord's working nonstop on the concerto. The rest of the band are going gigs, they're rehearsing, and then they're sleeping until noon. And John Lord's up all night writing the concerto, trying to get it ready. So the initial run through, they do a little rehearsal before what we're about to hear. And John Lord says it was an unmitigated disaster. He said he was almost in tears. Everything went wrong. Everyone played poorly. It was just horrible. One of the cellists stands up and she pronounces that she's upset that they have to play with this second-rate Beatles. Ouch.
Ooh.
And kind of storms off. But at one point, I guess Malcolm Arnold stands up, and this is recorded. I've seen this in a few different books. He stands up and basically just lays into the orchestra. He says, at one point he says, "You're supposed to be the finest orchestra in Britain, but you're playing like a bunch of see you next Tuesdays." And I guess everyone kind of got spooked by how upset he was, screaming at them. And then later on he calmed down a little bit and he says, "Tonight we're going to make history, so we might as well make music at the same time." So they get ready to go. John Lord is quoted as saying, "The musicians were obliged to play, and some of them hated it. Even the people in the audience weren't all that thrilled. But it was 1969. I think everything one does is a product of its time. Some things in this concerto were really very much dead weight. I'd be the first to admit it was only an experiment. I wanted to try and break these boundaries that separated rock and roll from classical. On the other hand, I don't want to reject anything I once did afterwards. I now only look back at something from, if you like, a wiser perspective. The fact that it was important at the time, and to be honest, I still like some of the melodies. Gillan singing, Ritchie's angry guitar, the whole atmosphere. I wouldn't distance myself from it. So there's tensions building up in the band. The band's playing all these live shows, and then Gillan is quoted as saying, "I must admit my attitude was all wrong. Roger and I had only just joined the band, and we really didn't appreciate what working with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra at the time could do for us. We were already writing for the album, and this seemed like an unwanted interruption. Deep Purple have always tried to be challenging, yet here we were with something truly challenging and different, and we couldn't appreciate what we had." So that's obviously him from more recently.
Yeah.
Looking at it in perspective. So there you have it. That's the lead up to the concerto. And without further ado, should we start this guy up?
Yeah.
So it starts off with...
Now, are we going through the whole thing, or?
Well, I think we can jump around a little bit.
Okay.
So it starts off with this little, almost like an advertisement for it. In this TV special, it does.
I'm not getting any audio.
Oh. I messed that up. So there you go.
Happened in London. It happened in the Royal Albert Hall, the world premiere of a new musical event.
So there's a brief couple minutes of kind of talking about this, because this was a TV special. And it is the music is slightly abridged, but I don't think it's going to matter because we weren't going to go through every minute of each movement. So it starts with kind of some behind the scenes stuff.
Unique occasion. One which
Kind of shows them kind of rehearsing with the band. Or with the orchestra.
Yeah.
And I'd recommend picking this up on DVD or whatever source you can, because it's really interesting to watch. So talking a little bit about John Lord, we skip ahead a little bit, we get to Malcolm Arnold talking with...
Wrong word. It's great, actually.
Yes, what's it like playing with us squares?
The first rehearsal the other day, and we sat down here and was like looking over there. God knows how many musicians.
So they kind of just have a little chat at John Lord's organ. Malcolm Arnold, I think it's pretty cool that, being a huge classical composer, he was so willing to accept them and kind of in awe of them.
Yeah.
And here it is. Here it begins. And this seems to cut off about 4 minutes from the first movement. And that might be 4 minutes of Ritchie's guitar solo for all I know. So they kind of lay down a theme here. Which the band will pick up a little bit later when they come in. So the band comes in right around... all of a sudden jump in there.
Yes, this is when I first got excited.
So this is an extended intro, and then the band and the orchestra kind of start having these back and forths. Here comes Roger.
I mean, this is a great instrumental section featuring Richie.
I just remember trying to, when we were recording, trying to recreate this guitar tone. I mean, not having a $3,000 guitar and not being in the Royal Albert Hall made it a little difficult. But just that sound he has.
But I mean, also remember, like a year before that, he was playing this god-awful guitar on, the first couple of Deep Purple albums, and now it's like, God, what a great player. What a great solo this is.
He is just all over it in this part. And John Lord would later kind of refine this idea when he does Gemini Suite, which I think is just the next year. And Richie's like, has no part of it. He's like, I'm done with that. And he gets Albert Lee to play. But if you have your eyes closed, Albert Lee and Richie Blackmore are almost indistinguishable. Albert Lee is incredible.
And I think I read something where Richie said at this point he'd just been playing guitar for about 15 years.
Yeah, well, yeah, something like that. It's very hard to make, like, I just love looking at the faces of the orchestra just sitting there.
I like this guy.
And that guy, they keep cutting to that guy, and I can understand why, because he's just getting into it.
60s style.
Yeah, people only got into stuff like that in the 60s.
There were a couple of points in this where you'll see, like, over Richie's shoulder something like the orchestra guy, one of the orchestra guys, and they're just like...
There's one point when he does his little solo, and that comes up pretty soon. It's the moment I remember the most from watching this originally, because he has the look on his face says it all. If you watch nothing else from the concerto, you have to watch the part where Richie plays and the violin player behind him just smirks.
Yeah.
He's wiggling his eyebrows there. So this goes on for a while. Oh, yeah, a little.
Richie throwing in a couple of, like, really nice syncopated rhythms. And
just raking the strings, yeah.
And I just kind of like how, like, Malcolm Arnold's just standing there like, you done yet?
Well, and they talk about it too. You don't really see it in this, but there's a point where he was supposed to go for 90 seconds and he ends up going for a long time, and Malcolm Arnold's desperately trying to get his attention. But knowing Richie, he's probably purposefully ignoring him. And he just goes on for, like, multiple minutes.
Well, because he's like, I don't want to be here anyway, so I'm just going to rip an awesome solo as long as I want.
Here we go. They start syncing up here. Now they start to have a back and forth again. See, this is stuff like this. It just makes me think people should not dismiss this album. It's just, again, it's not something you're going to listen to every day on your drive to work or whatever, but as a historical moment, as something to actually sit and watch the performance visually, it's incredible.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, this is definitely something that you should be watched. It's much more interesting that way. And there are actually very few parts in this where the band and the orchestra are playing together. It's like mostly like adversarial, which I think is how it was written.
And it's incredible. I think more so in the third movement where they hit all of these marks, the band and the orchestra switching off, and just all of these downbeats and upbeats that they're hitting together is just, I mean, it's incredible. And Roger Glover talks about being out of his depth, but I'm just looking at him being like, how is he hitting those notes? So the band's going to come back in right about here. Another little extended jam here. It looks like Ian Place is playing with like toothpicks. His drumsticks are so skinny.
Yeah, but he's killing it. They're all killing it.
Oh yeah.
You know, one thing I always found interesting was how John Lord really just kind of gave himself like not a really big part in this. Like he didn't even, like, if Richie had this like really long solo. I mean, John Lord just solos for a little bit. He like doesn't feature himself, which, I mean, I know he wrote the whole thing, but you figure like
this part right here is really nice.
Yeah. Yeah, this really grooves.
Here when the orchestra comes back in. See those bows go up. And you're going to want to watch over Richie's shoulder on this next part.
This is really cool. I love this.
Watch the violinist.
He's like, Nigel, can you believe this wanker? He thinks he's good.
Well, that guy had probably been playing violin for 50 years at that point. I was probably one of the best violin players in the entire world. And sadly, we don't know his name. Somebody out there does. But yeah, it's just quite a sight to behold.
So it's just like, if they weren't paying me 500 pounds for this performance, I'd be out of here. You know?
I like this guy on timpani. He's very young looking. He looks kind of like Forrest Gump. Or like Martin Short. I mean, I guess everybody, like every straight cut guy in the 60s looked like Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
No, not taking anything away from him. So the band's going to come back in just a minute here. Skip ahead just a smidge. So you had this segment where Richie's playing his solo, then you have a segment where John's playing his solo. You've got Ian doing the vocals. You've got, you know, an orchestral clarinet solo here. You have a drum solo later on, and why I was saying earlier, he kind of refines this with the Gemini suite, and he has it broken up instead of 5 movements. I think there's instead of 3, I think there's 5. Mm-hmm. 1 for guitar, 1 for organ, 1 for vocals, which features Yvonne Elliman actually, and does the drums. So he kind of like does the same sort of idea, but he kind of expands upon it. So it'll be interesting to tackle that one down the road. So here we go. This is kind of, we're starting to end the first movement here. It's going to be the climax to the first movement. Now this part right here is just so well orchestrated.
Wow.
And that's the end of the first movement. So,
Nice.
I mean, really, really impressive stuff, and how they could possibly have done that in such little. They didn't have much time to rehearse because you know, you can't just rent the Philharmonic for rehearsal time.
And what you were saying about John Lord saying that the one of the rehearsals was like a disaster. It's like you'd never know it by seeing this.
But you could easily see how this could become a disaster.
Yeah.
I
But
mean,
yeah.
I think it's really, and again, we're not musical experts. We don't know everything that's ever happened, but to me, this is different. We've talked about how this is different than Metallica just playing live with violins, playing along to whatever it is, Fade to Black. While that's cool, and there's not taking anything away from that, this is something altogether different. And that back and forth and trade-off between the orchestra and the band is just, it's incredible. I've never heard anything like it before or after. And if anyone had, other than like something like Gemini Suite, which is also by John Lord, but if anyone has or can tell us of a thing that might have preceded this that would have led to it, from what I heard briefly from the Keith Emerson thing, it didn't have quite that same feeling to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the thing that still impresses me about this is the fact that it is a whole new like batch of songs. Like the expanded version, which we're not talking about today, does have them playing other songs during this performance. But I mean, the center of this whole piece is the original music that they wrote and the interplay between and um the orchestra versus the band type of thing, which was like completely original, not playing like any of their other songs or anything, which is just like I mean, it's really like what they were trying to accomplish, which is like melding classical music and rock together like in an original, like brand new way, like taking like legit like classical music, not just having a classical influence, but like, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And that's
like
what
you
makes
said,
it cool.
they're not just playing you know, Smoke on the Water with the violins going dun, 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 you know,
Exactly,
which is
like you're
what a lot of bands would have done. You
yeah,
know,
you're taking like music that was like inspired by like classical composers and putting it together with like the band, which is like truly like melding them together, like trying to create like a new style. And I think that a lot of it really works because a lot of rock music is really dynamic and like you know, passionate and has all those highs and lows and like is really, you know what I mean, the same as like classical, which I mean you could see it hidden in all sorts of different ways and like in all sorts of rock music, but it's like it's really like the dynamics are the same if like the music itself really isn't.
right.
So
And we talked a little bit before the show, but we both we've been rating songs, and for this album we both just kind of gave every song a 3.
mhm,
Which
yeah.
is it's very hard to, these aren't songs, these are movements,
Yeah.
and it's hard to rate them the same way you're rating an album. I love this album. I think it's great. I think it's an amazing work. I just kind of gave it that kind of run of the mill 3 because in thinking of this in the whole as an album, and if I'm looking at an album, am I going to put this on while I'm driving in the car, or am I going to put on, I don't know, Burn? You know, so I don't want that to take anything away from this because I think this is one of the more interesting and important musical experiments that any of the people involved with Deep Purple ever did,
Hmm. And I
despite the
mean,
fact that everyone hated it at the time.
yeah, but I mean, if you think about it too, like, I mean, we saw this at the time, not knowing any of this, and a lot of the stuff that you just like read about the conflict in the with the band and everything before that, I didn't know a lot of that either. But it doesn't really show like they really committed to it. And if you look at like the performances, how cool they are. I mean, it's like you have John Lord who wrote the whole thing, pretty much, who's like 28. All the other guys are like early 20s. Like I think the rest of them were 24, and Ian Pace was like just barely 21. Like he just turned 20. I mean, could you imagine being just turning 21 and like doing that?
I can't even imagine just being 21. It sounds great.
But I mean, he was basically like, still a kid, and he's like playing with the London Philharmonic Orchestra, and he's killing it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all of them were, and it's just like, it's crazy to think about, that they were. And I mean, I'm saying that through the years, I mean, some of the greatest composers, and even now you can see like on YouTube, these really young kids, like, playing this really, at a high level and stuff like that, but just still blows my mind, when I think about, in our lifetime, there were people that young, like doing stuff that's groundbreaking, because we can't be like, oh, well, Beethoven is, I mean, that was like, that was way before we were born, but something like this, I feel is like, pretty groundbreaking. And it happened, not, well, it was before our lifetime, but I mean,
not that much before.
But I mean, exactly, but all the people that are involved with it are still, except for John Lord, we still live to, see them create other music, and you know what I mean? It's like, it's
Right.
kind of a cool thing. Aside from the fact that I love the video too, because one of the things, that watching the performance was kind of like the stuffy old orchestra playing was like really cool. But to me, it was just kind of like, I always knew that there was kind of a thing there between them and the band. Like it was like when the band was playing, I'm just like, yeah, take that. It was almost like,
take that, old man.
well, yeah, it was almost like sitting there watching with my parents, being just like, yeah, like these guys are like being really cool, and all these like old violin guys are just standing there and they got to take it, and
Yeah,
which is pretty much what was happening. But
oh yeah, they're like, hey, do you want to still have a job? Then shut up.
but I just
play the violin when it says on the damn sheet music.
But I always thought that was the cool thing about watching it, is you were seeing like this really like kind of like weird, like, like stark like juxtaposition between like these really like you said, like really like schooled classical players, really like accomplished, and then like just a bunch of like 20-year-olds being like, hippies and everything, that have been playing for like 10-15 years, and they're just like, oh, here we come. And it's just it's just, that's really cool, because some of the coolest stuff is when people say, oh, you can't put this and this together, and it's like, why not? And try it out, because see what happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool stuff. That's what happens when you think outside the box, and that's what this was. And now it really isn't, but as you mentioned before, don't think anybody really has done anything like this since.
No, not at all. With that, we get into the second movement,
which overall I feel is my least favorite.
Overall, yes. So you really get a sense in watching this for the scene. You just see like the sea of people behind Malcolm Arnold as he conducts, and just big plumes of cigarette smoke rising into the air, because you could just smoke wherever the hell you wanted in 1969. Up until actually pretty recently, you could do that. You see like a mixture of people in the audience. Like there's just people that are just clearly there that are probably on LSD. There's people that are there that are kind of being respectful. At one point, you see this mother shushing her little child who's like kind of running around, like, like a kid in church or whatever. This second movement starts up a lot slower than the first one. It's a really, really long and slow build until it gets to Ian Gillan, which...
I'm not getting any audio again, by the way.
You're not? I think it just might be really quiet. You hear that?
Mm-mm.
Oh, well, I will put it back on. So, Ian Gillan, I was not usually a huge fan of this kind of part of the concerto with Ian Gillan's first part of his vocals. At first, I wasn't like hugely sold on it. I'm trying to figure out how to share this with you here. Here we go. So I wasn't like hugely sold on his particular vocal stylings on the first part, but it did really grow on me, and I did like the second part as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, can you hear this?
Yes.
Okay.
There we go.
So the story goes that John Lord had been harassing Ian Gillan to write vocals for this part. Have you written the vocals for it? Have you written? And Ian kept saying, oh, yeah. I'll get around to it. And apparently before the performance, they went to an Italian restaurant, which I guess was like right behind the Royal Albert Hall. And Ian Gillan and Malcolm Arnold had like a whole bottle of Chianti together. And Ian Gillan wrote the lyrics like literally like an hour before they went on while he was eating some Italian food. Which from...
You can tell too, because I mean, he's reading them off a sheet while he's singing.
Exactly. It's really funny that like, it doesn't seem like, I guess Ritchie and, well, Roger Glover has some sheet music up. I don't know if it's sheet music or just arrangements, but yeah, most of them are just kind of going off the cuff, and Ian Gillan's looking down at his lyrics. And his lyrics are very much about the moment and about, you know, kind of like, you know, it's basically equates to, hey, I'm going to sing a song. I wonder what's going to happen. Are the people going to like it? Are they going to laugh at me? What am I going to do? How will I know when it's time to start? Like, that's like all of his lyrics. Not his best lyric outing ever, but hearing Ian Gillan sing at any point is a treat. So he comes in right around here with his vocals. Let's see. Right around here. Here he comes.
How can I see when the light is gone out? How
He goes looking down at his lyrics.
can I hear when you speak so silently? More than enough is never too much. Hold out a hand, I'm so out of touch.
And that woman is just like,
Oh,
she is just
like,
oh my.
take me to bed now.
I'm pretty sure if Ian Gillan wanted to pursue something with her, he would have been okay.
I mean, look at him. He's a very handsome guy.
I mean, yeah, he had everything. I mean, talent, looks, just like Sheila Carter said.
Yep.
Oozing charisma. The kind of guy that can join what's going to be one of the biggest bands in the world, be performing at the Royal Albert Hall, being harassed by the longtime member of the band who he's just joined. Hey, write those lyrics. I spent 6 months staying up until 4 a.m. every night writing this damn concerto. Write the lyrics. Oh, yeah. I'll get to it. And does it like an hour before they go on and somehow gets away with it. Like, you'd think most people would have just been fired. So they go back into this, they go back into the kind of this section right here. You can see John Lord flipping over his pages of his score as he tries to follow along.
I've lost audio again.
I think it's clipping out because it's too quiet.
Oh, okay.
So Ian Gillan's going to come back in. Oops. So they go through this big, long, extended jam, and then they kind of go back to the band. And I feel like when the band comes back in, this is a really, really great part right here. And this to me doesn't even sound like Deep Purple. This reminds me of like Joe Cocker kind of feel.
Yeah.
Even when Ian starts singing. Richie's playing is just incredible.
Oh yeah.
What shall I do when they stand smiling at me? Look at the floor and be oh so cool, oh so cool.
Look at that look on Ian Gillan's face right there. Like, he looks like he's really, like, as much crap as he's talked about this project. Malcolm Arnold is just dancing. For a bigger guy, he's really bouncing around. But for all the crap he talked about this, it really seems like in that moment he was really drinking it in, you know?
Oh yeah.
What shall I do if they all go wrong? What shall I do?
I think this is what kind of clinches the second movement for me.
Yeah.
And I think hearing Ian Gillan, it's hard hearing Ian Gillan in 1969 singing that kind of part over an orchestral part that just takes me to Jesus Christ Superstar right away.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with that. So this goes for a while. They go, another noteworthy part I think is right here, which is this to me sounds like Boston's Foreplay. Some just great playing. John Lord has got some, you know, for the guy who wrote this and everything, he's got some great parts in here, but he's kind of overshadowed by Richie and the orchestra and everything,
Mm-hmm.
as far as playing goes. So the strings are going to come back in. There's going to be a big timpani section right at the end of the second movement here.
Drum, Forrest, drum.
Or maybe the drum movement's probably in the more in the beginning of the third movement. Then this kind of ends the second movement, kind of ends a little bit. Where is it? It's going to end right here. And they talk a little bit about how the audience didn't really know when to start clapping, or and you could see it there. They're all just kind of like, are we supposed to clap now? That's the second movement. I think in there, you know, putting the words in. I always felt like when I first listened to this that the words were just kind of shoehorned in, like it was like an afterthought, like, well, Ian's in the band, we should let him sing something. But I think it really works.
Yeah, I mean, just like everything else that we've been listening to over again, I am approaching this with like a new perspective. Like, I mean, I thought of that part probably the same way for the longest time. But even like the emotion that you saw on his face, like when he was between verses and everything, it's like that little type of stuff I've seen like 100 times or whatever, but it's just like, I notice it more now, for what it is, or how great everything just kind of fits together. And it's not like the whole thing actually isn't as long as I remember it being. Like I always felt it was like so long, and it's actually very short. This whole thing,
Yeah,
like the whole concerto.
I think it's, yeah, 20, 40, like, well, it's like 50 something minutes.
Yeah, but I mean,
Yeah.
like years ago, it could have been like 2 hours for all I knew.
Yeah, it's one of those things you have to be in the right frame of mind to listen to too.
Well, yeah, you don't just want to put it on when you're in the mood to like rock out.
Exactly. I think, I don't know, just that moment where Ian Gillan just like finishes the first section of that second part of the song,
Mm-hmm.
and like that look on his face. Like, can you just imagine being Ian Gillan and hearing your own voice reverberating through the Royal Albert Hall? Or even being not Ian Gillan and hearing his voice come through. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And same thing with Richie, like hearing that. I mean, I can't even imagine what it would have sounded like being there, but listening to this almost 50-year-old recording of just that, the dynamics inside of that room of his guitar and his guitar tone, and it's the way it sounded. I remember that part where he's playing and the guitar play, or the violin player behind him is kind of giggling at him. I always trying to recreate that in various recordings, like that kind of feeling of that staccato sort of orchestra stop and the guitar continuing to go. And like I said, that was just like my ideal guitar tone.
Mm-hmm.
It still kind of is. It's just such a great sound.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm actually just maybe skipping back to the Deep Purple album. Like, I'm not even like, I always thought that maybe his sound changed because, or got better, his sound playing whatever, because he switched guitars. But now I'm not even sure if he really did. Because I mean, some of the stuff on the Deep Purple album did sound like he was playing like a Strat, like a Lelania and stuff like that. But it's just like, it's very clear that he's playing that big hollow body guitar, but he sounds like so much more like the sound that he would like go on to adapt, like his playing, his style and everything. But it's still so weird to me that he went from that kind of like tortured cat solo to like soloing to like so good in like a year.
Well, like we talked about, I think Book of Taliesin was terribly mixed and possibly badly recorded. Like it just doesn't fit in the mix. It's like everything sticks out like a sore thumb. And I don't think his playing was any worse or better on Shades or on Deep Purple. I think it was just a really bad mix in that particular album, because even in Shades of Deep Purple, his playing didn't sound like Book of Taliesin. Book of Taliesin was bad, and I don't think it was his fault. Interesting.
Yeah.
I posted a video on Twitter today of a performance they did. It must have been shortly after In Rock was released. And in that video, he's going back and forth between the Strat and the Gretsch. And it's like not the Gretsch, the Gibson. I'm sorry. That same hollow-bodied one he's using here, and just whatever Strat he had at the time. He's going back and forth between the two within a performance where they only do a few songs. So he must have kept that in his little on-stage arsenal there for a short time at least.
Okay.
But yeah, like I can't recall many videos any much later than that where he's playing anything other than the Strat.
Yeah, but that's just my own thing. Is like, I mean, yeah, it could have been like so many different things, but it's just like, it was just like, just hearing on like the recorded works, like how much better his playing was. And it's just like, you know what I mean? Like I couldn't believe, like when we went back to the first couple of albums, and I was just like, please stop. And but then it's just like the extended solo section in the first movement here, he could have just played for like another 20 minutes and I just would have been like, yes, keep going.
Absolutely. Yeah, that part could have never ended as far as I was concerned.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next part, we'll fire up movement 3 here. Here's Malcolm Arnold. And this part starts a little frantic.
This always reminded me of like the score of a horror movie.
Yeah, yep.
Like this part here.
The French horns coming in. I love that poor woman's getting a horn directly in her face. I don't know if those are French horns or English horns. I don't know what the difference is. But I love how all the French horns, but to play it, you have to play it directly in the face of the guy sitting to your right. Or that poor woman sitting to your right, whoever it may be.
Oh, yeah, I never noticed that.
Just every time they lift them up, it's like just blowing straight into the person's face. And this part's all about percussion. So you've got the orchestra snare, the timpani, the marimba. All that orchestral stuff is coming in before it leads to Ian Pace's drum solo. It definitely has a movie soundtrack feel to it.
Oh yeah, this part especially, like in the way it opens up, it makes me think of like a like something you hear in like a Dracula movie or something like that, like from back at the time, like definitely like a horror, like suspense.
This sounds to me like it could almost be like a John Williams sort of like feel to it, especially with the horns. Like that, I could hear that in a Star Wars movie. So here comes Ian Pace. He's like, I've got it from here, boys. He kind of looks like he's like holding his breath. And there's not a lot of time where the band and the orchestra are playing together. So when it does reach that crescendo at the end of the second movement, it's really exciting. You got here's a little boy like running around because he's bored. His mom's like, shh. I don't know how much of this is just B-roll from before the concert even started when they go to the audience, but here we go. Now it sounds like a Western. Doesn't it? I mean,
yeah, it does.
Beautiful little, like, almost flamenco sounding line. So we go through this, we get to the band's going to come in together again. Another great Deep Purple style extended jam here. It's come one of their first early jams, which they would do thousands and thousands of jams just like this in concerts for years after this. That guy was on something. They keep cutting to him. Probably security didn't have him removed in the first movement.
No, we need to represent the hippies.
Yeah, exactly. Listen to this. All those like quick hits from the drums, just. That guy looks like Ashton Kutcher. Guy in the audience. That 70s show. Well, it wouldn't have been the 70s yet.
Just really interesting to see all the different people in the audience, too. Like you were saying before. You know, the mother with the kid, the LSD guy, the bored looking lady, the thirsty chick.
The military, the thirsty. There's like a military guy there too, like an officer from the army is just standing there watching.
Yeah, I wonder how people like who went to this? Like, how was it advertised and who like bought tickets to this?
I'm sure they must have given tickets away for free to just kind of promote it because this is like going to be a big TV special, and I'm sure they wanted to have a lot of those like hippie type representation there, you know. There's Martin Short on drums, and here's Ian's drum solo.
Yes.
Good drum solo for a 21-year-old. Although nothing to me beats that was the Copenhagen one. That's an incredible.
The Denmark one. Yeah.
Denmark. That's like a 10-minute drum solo. He's trying out some of those early tricks here. Some pretty incredible drumming. I always forget that Ian Pace is left-handed and plays left-handed. You know, he's got his hi-hats on the right side.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can't think of any other drummers that play left-handed. You wonder what the timpani guy and the guy that just plays the snare drum in the orchestra are like thinking about this. Like, are they envious of Ian Pace that he's in a rock band? Do they? Those guys are young. I mean, I'd love to interview one of them and see what they thought of this whole experiment. Because it's like you could see them being into this music, you know, even though they're in the Philharmonic or the. Kind of looks like Animal right now. His hair everywhere. He's just hitting and he's only playing a 4-piece set, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And he just brings the cowbell in right there. It's great. And he gets a little.
And that gets the applause. The cowbell.
Richie must have been pissed because he did all these solos. Nobody interrupted the movement to give him a solo, but Ian Pace gets the solo. Gets the applause. It's like they were too young to know any better, or too young to know that this was as big a deal as it was.
Yeah.
I don't think I would sleep for a week leading up to this if you told me I had to do it. Yeah, look at that crowd. They had to have just let anybody in. Hey, do you like psychedelic music?
Do you like stuffy classical music?
Well, apparently they played before this. This was like a long show. They played. Malcolm Arnold had written a symphony that they played right just before this. Purple
Yes.
played like a show with 5 songs or whatever. Then they did the concerto. So there would have had to been like a change in the or maybe like in the good seats you had like the well off people and they just let the hippies come onto the floor or whatever.
Yeah.
And Ian Gillan's just sitting there for 90% of this, just sitting there, just kind of with a violinist's knee in his back practically, just crammed next to the bass amp. He had to have been a pretty good sport about that. Oh, she's freaking out. She can't believe it. That had to have been B-roll.
Yeah.
This part's great. Richie Blackmore's switching the page on his sheet music. He looks like he's lost. But I think he's about to rip into it. This is great. Here we go. And then as we began, we kind of end with a little percussion here. Some really, really intricate little marimba, timpani, snare parts. And the strings are just kind of droning in the background, keeping the beat while the percussionists run away with it. So here we go. This is kind of the grand climax coming up here. All the bows are going up on the violins. The guy with a little bugle. Here it comes. You see John Lord just sink down into his seat like, oh my God, I cannot believe that we pulled that off. Malcolm Arnold's calling him up to the, whatever the heck you call it. I want to say podium, but...
The balcony, the riser, whatever.
Wherever the conductor conducts from. I'm sure there's a technical term for it that people are yelling at their podcast right now. So John Lord is like being very obnoxious about insisting that the everyone in the orchestra stand up for the ovation. Richie Blackmore looks legitimately happy right there too. He looks like, oops, crap. Richie Blackmore looks really happy about all the applause that they're getting. But you could just see everyone in the orchestra being like, well, it's not proper. We're not supposed to stand up, and it's supposed to be for the conductor. We'll do it, I guess.
Curses.
So a great night for John Lord as he soaks in the applause from the crowd. And that's it. What a great event that would have been to be at.
And I mean, they look like you saw all of them, like not just Richie, but all of them were like smiling. And
yeah,
I mean, it had to have felt good.
Well, you know what? They were all professionals about it. They did their job. They came in and they performed what they needed to perform. And I think a lot of them are a lot more or maybe putting on about how put off they were by this whole thing. I think they had to have had a good time.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of like maybe feelings leading up to it, and there probably, and then like Ian Gillan's recollections later about how he should have appreciated it more. They should have all appreciated it more. But I'm sure that during it, they were really into it and nervous and excited and enjoying themselves and the adrenaline and everything. So I think like at that moment, they were probably really just loving it and appreciating it. And then everything kind of surrounding it is what they're talking about. Like, maybe the before, the feelings after, like, thank God it's over, and who knows what else. But
well, I was reading, I forgot who said it, but someone compared it, someone in the band, I can't remember who it was, but they kind of said that this was looming over them like a trip to the dentist. Like they were like, oh, we got that concerto we have to do. And then when it was all over, they were like, it wasn't so bad. Like wasn't as bad as it was making it out to be.
Well,
so
my trips to the dentist are the opposite. Because I dread them, and then afterwards I'm just like, I can't feel my teeth for 3 months. So it's. But I know what you're getting at.
So I was just reading while I was waiting for you to reconnect, I just opened up Ian Gillan's Child in Time and checked it out and looked for this part because I hadn't read it. And he says that night after the show, John Lord's first child was born.
Whoa.
Yeah, which I hadn't seen anywhere else, but I thought that was pretty cool. So pretty big day for John Lord.
Yeah, jeez.
So in 6 months, between August of 1969 and January 1970, Deep Purple released 3 albums: Book of Taliesin, Deep Purple, and the Concerto in 6 months. This one seemed to have gone off the best. Everyone was really, really, really happy with the show, and more importantly, it seemed to be like John Coletta, one of the managers for Deep Purple, took complete control over the publicity around this event to catapult this band. So while this isn't well known outside of like Deep Purple hardcore fans, this seemed to be what took them to the next level. It got them a ton of press. It was aired on the BBC. People were really interested in this band. It came with a lot of other aspects, which is that people weren't really sure what to make of the band. I was reading about one show where they thought they had to book an orchestra to play with Deep Purple when they booked Deep Purple to play, and they couldn't get one, so they hired like a brass band to be there. I don't know how they thought this was going to work. Like, I'll just bring a band. They'll make it work. So when Deep Purple got there, they're like, what the hell is this? And they just had the brass band open for them, and then they played. So it definitely could cause a lot of confusion. And I'm sure for like 6 months after this, it was really frustrating for the band. And there was like stories of Richie like storming off, like being like, it's like hanging around our neck, this stupid concerto, being all dramatic about it. But I think I couldn't have lasted too long. They must have shed that eventually and moved on.
Well, I was also another interesting fact I didn't know is that did you know that this was actually performed twice?
I read that it was performed 3 times. I had read that it was performed twice. Like
several months later, they performed it at I think the Hollywood Bowl or something like that in California.
So what I read that as well, and I was surprised too because I had never heard that. And then in one of the other books, I think it was the Smoke on the Water book, they talk about how they performed it 3 more times, once in Zurich, once in Vienna, and the last time was at the Hollywood Bowl in Los Angeles. Right. And then they lost the score.
Right.
Which is insane to me.
70, yeah. Which they didn't say that. It's just like, they just like, whoops.
Whoops. We lost the score. And I remember we talked about this years ago, shortly after it came out. In 99, they performed this again with many, many other things, not just the concerto. And they had to rewrite the score from scratch because it was lost. And I can't, the idea that you'd have the one and only copy of the score traveling with you and then, oops, we lost it, seems insane to me.
Yeah, I wonder what happened to it. I wonder if somebody picked it up and now they're hoarding it.
That'd be a great collector's item, except you'd probably be arrested.
But it's crazy though, is that I think it was another composer was working with John Lord to reconstruct it based on audio and video. They said they would watched video of it as well.
Yeah, I'm sure that was really helpful that they had that to just
yeah.
So
well, that's nuts. If I were John Lord, I would just been like, fuck. If you considering how much he worked on it, could you imagine what his reaction must have been when he found out it got lost?
No offense to the late great John Lord, but if I was John Lord, I would have made a copy. I know copies weren't as easy to come by in those days, but I would have made a copy. I was just reading today, this is a complete aside, but the Kinks, when they recorded Lola,
yeah,
he had sung Coca-Cola in the lyrics, just like Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
They decided there was a copyright issue. They couldn't say Coca-Cola. So they flew him from New York to London to record singing Charity Cola, and then flew him back. like a 6,000-mile round trip just to replace the word Coca-Cola in a song with the word cherry cola. So that gives you an idea of the technology of the time. Like nowadays, it'd just be like, well, go in the nearest recording studio and send us the WAV file and we'll splice it in. And same thing with this. Like, they might not have had Kinkos or something back then, but they had to be some way that they reproduced these scores, and I think that there would be a copy.
Well, yeah, can you imagine John Lord just walking into a Kinko's with this big thing and just slamming it down? Could you run off about 800 pages? Like, I don't know.
You probably have like a mimeograph machine or something to do that.
Oh, it wasn't that long ago.
It was. We had mimeograph machines when I was in grade school.
Oh shit, that's
Did
right.
you ever have those? You get all your tests would be that blue paper or the blue writing on the paper. I still remember the smell of it.
I don't know. I forget more than I remember, or remember more than I forget. I can't remember. See, I'm proving it right now. I don't even know what I'm talking about.
After an hour and a half of talking about the concerto, I don't remember anything either. But, so apparently, like, the reviews of this were like really, some people really loved it, but a lot of like rock critics didn't know what to make of it. Classical music critics didn't know what to make of it.
I'm sure they hated it.
Oh, classical people, of course. Oh, no, rather.
Oh, posh tosh or whatever. Pish posh,
Posh tosh.
I don't know.
But
it's getting late over here.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you're an hour ahead of me.
Yeah.
So the BBC was so happy with with this that they commissioned John Lord to do the follow-up, which we talked about, the Gemini Suite, and he did that almost a year later. That one was not billed as Deep Purple, and it didn't have all of Deep Purple in it, like we talked about. Richie said, "I'm out. I did that already. Not involved. Not interested."
Yeah.
And they had Albert Lee fill in.
Yeah, I'm sure Richie was like done. He was like, "I don't like playing with orchestras. Forget you guys. Kick rocks."
Exactly. So Malcolm Arnold, interviewed in 1970, said, "What strikes me about Deep Purple is their tremendous musical integrity. This is so refreshing in a commercial world. I loved working with them. They're thorough musicians. They're not trying to prove anything. They just like to play now and again with a symphony orchestra. They're not
just
What's that?
Just now and again.
Just not every so often when I have the chance." He said they're not trying to prove any deep philosophical problem. They just want to write music that's enjoyable, which I thought was cool. Richie Blackmore was slightly more critical. He says, "I was not into classical music then. I was very, very moody and just wanted to play very, very loudly and jump around a lot. I couldn't believe we were playing with orchestras. We kept getting lumbered playing with them. It started off in '68, this is my opinion, as a relatively competent band with a lot to say, but saying it all at the same time as each other. In '69, we went into the classical stuff because that was John Lord's big thing, to write a concerto for group and orchestra. He was very sincere, but I didn't like playing it or respect the fact that we were doing it. The orchestra was very condescending towards us, and I didn't like playing with them. So it was one big calamity on stage. But John was happy with it, and management was happy with it because we had a press angle, which I resented very much." Of course, this is the press angle that gets them all the eyes on them when they release in rock. So, I mean, it did really contribute to that.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says, too, that he wanted to make the next record after this. He's like, we has to be hard rock. We have to go all out. It's going to be the heaviest thing ever. And if it doesn't work out, I'll play with orchestras for the rest of my life. And it turns out it did work out. So he was off the hook. So as we talked about, they played this 3 more times. They also did a 1999 performance, which was pretty much the same lineup, swapping out Morse for Blackmore. This one was huge, though. They did a bunch of songs. Ronnie James Dio was there. Did a great version of some songs from Butterfly Ball. It was just a huge event and a really, really great. You had years ago told me about that on Facebook. You said, "Oh, you got to check this out." And I remember watching that and just being really, really impressed with it because it had escaped me in the late 90s when it came out.
Yeah.
And I was interested to see that in November of this year in Quebec, they're doing a 50th anniversary version of this with Bruce Dickinson.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yeah, it sounds really cool. I have family in Quebec. We should go check it out. I don't.
Hey.
It doesn't say where in Quebec. Quebec is a very large place. So there you have it.
Well, to recap here, because this seems to, even though it's two different versions of the band, I feel like this kind of puts like the you know, it puts the cap on kind of like the beginnings of Deep Purple before we get to the good stuff.
Correct.
But it looks like right now, like I was telling you before, this scores pretty respectably. Yes, and our overall album reviews. I'm not even drinking a beer. This is water. Like this
I
is
know. Yeah,
so.
I'm drinking. This is my moment to have a beer. I probably shouldn't be having a beer, but
Um, but not surprisingly, well, actually, yeah, kind of the complete episode 6 scored the lowest with us overall, followed by Shades of Deep Purple, Book of Taliesin. This was like an even like 3, and then Deep Purple, self-titled, still scoring the highest between the two of us. So I would say I'm not surprised that even though it was an official Deep Purple release, that the complete episode 6 scored the lowest. Even our scores were even lower than Shades and Book of Taliesin, just because it was so kind of all over the place.
right. And it's not a cohesive album. It's just a collection of songs. So it's a
Right.
mixed bag for sure.
Right. Which, I mean, if we were giving like fractions of points and stuff like that, I might, give a little bit more for, the drum solo, or, Ian Gillan's vocal parts or whatever, or like Richie's solo, which are definitely my favorites. And definitely the parts where the band and the orchestra are together, which are few and far between. But actually, it's kind of cool if you think about it, because they don't do it so much that you're tired of it. It's just like you get excited for those like maybe 5 seconds that like in each like part where they like are playing together. And
I
it
think
makes it so much
there's
cooler.
like parts, there's like these flashes of absolute brilliance where it's like, oh, if I was gonna rate that 35-second segment, that would be a 5.
Yeah.
I think it just averages out to being a 3. The classical aspect of it, I don't know if enough about classical music to really grade it. To me, it sounds like perfectly competent. Some of it sounds like normal kind of, apologies, but boring classical music. Some of it sounds like really well done, like movie score.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, the parts with sometimes with a band and everything is gelling together for little segments. It's great.
Yeah. But overall, considering the tensions and the disastrous rehearsals and the last minute lyrics and the age of the members of Deep Purple and the stuffy old orchestra, and like just kind of how disastrous it could have been, it stands as a really good testament to like a cool experiment, as they called it.
It's not really, it's like not a Deep Purple album, you know.
Yeah.
He did it again with Gemini Suite, where he had Albert Lee filling in for Richie Blackmore. He
Yeah.
did it with Windows, which is like Ray Fenwick filling in for Richie Blackmore, because Richie was done. He just didn't want to have anything to do with this sort of stuff anymore. But that's like
But this was the first.
that's like the Mark III version of it, where you've got Ray Fenwick sitting in on it, and you've got Ian Pace wasn't involved in Windows, but you've got Ray Fenwick on guitar, you've got Glenn Hughes on bass and vocals, David Coverdale on vocals. So you've got they've all got these great moments to them.
Mm-hmm.
He just kept trying that same approach, and it's really interesting to listen to them as a fan.
Well, I would say that I don't think that I've really heard anything past this. So like Gemini Suite and Windows and all that stuff, like I definitely should take a listen. And it's kind of weird to think that I haven't heard them after all these years. I mean, I probably have maybe heard like bits and pieces or whatever, but never listened to them in their entirety. So I think it's probably about time that I do.
Yeah, I remember finding a copy of Gemini Suite at it was somewhere in Boston. It was like Newbury Comics or something, and in the early '90s, and just being like, "Oh wow, I've been looking for this," and I listened to it a few times, but it was more from like a collector standpoint. But I'd be interested to listen to that again,
Yeah.
and I'm very interested to listen to In Rock again because, like we talked about last time, I haven't heard it in a very long time,
Yeah.
and to listen to that with a new, like, more critical perspective will be really interesting.
Well, I think that our approach to next week's episode, which, folks, it will be in rock finally, is that
I think we should take a pause and just do Jesus Christ Superstar for 3 episodes.
actually, yeah, yeah, in the Deep Purple chronology, we could definitely mention that, but
No, I think it would be the right thing to do in Rock.
the honorable mention, but yeah, I haven't really like listened to and examined the albums like this. So I think this approach is giving me a different perspective on the album. So I expect to be listening to In Rock and like hearing it in a whole different way.
Completely, because having listened to nothing but Mark 1 and Episode 6 and the Concerto for like the past 2 months, essentially,
Yeah.
it's gonna be like hearing it for the first time. I'm just like, wow, oh my God, this is so heavy. And just trying to imagine what it must have been like to the listener in 1970 to hear this for the first time. Like we've been talking about, this must have been such a shock for someone listening to Deep Purple all these years to just be like, well, the short time they were out, I should say, but to been listening to this music and then hear In Rock must have blown your socks off.
Oh yeah. So that'll be really cool to like kind of approach it like it's the first time. So that'll be cool. That'll be next week. We'll finally get heavy.
Absolutely.
Or
So speaking of heavy, in the news, have you seen this? The Ronnie James Dio hologram tour?
I'll be going this Thursday.
Already?
Yep.
Oh, we're going to have a report from the road on the next episode.
Field report on the In Rock episode. I'm going to see the Dio hologram this
my
Thursday at the Worcester Palladium.
Wow, they're really getting around because they just did their first show the other day, right?
Yeah, I think it was in Florida.
Wow. Of course, if you're doing a heavy metal show or whatever, Worcester's going to be one of your top cities to go to.
Yeah, I'm just like I don't know. I don't know how they picked the venues or whatever. But there was actually reports like maybe right after the first or second show that they had canceled one of them due to I think it was the venue. Something about the venue, like I'm paraphrasing, but I feel like it was like the venue couldn't support like the stage show or something like that. It had to do with the logistics of the stage show. So I was like, oh boy, I said, I hope that they're not going to start to cancel shows because, the thing's glitching out. But
the holograms.
but something really interesting though is like whenever ads come up for this, it's just like all the comments are just so negative. Like I don't see anybody saying anything positive. And actually it's kind of discouraging because the Worcester show I saw on they started like advertising BOGO tickets for it.
Really?
Which indicates to me that it's selling really poorly because I mean, if like I scroll down trying to find something positive and it's like 98% of the comments are just like so negative. And it's like,
people like to just crap all over everything, like, I mean, anytime somebody tries something new or it's not as good as the old stuff. It's like, well, he's friggin' dead. What do you want them to do? Like, this is something they're trying to do to honor him and I mean, I haven't seen it, so maybe it's not good. I don't know.
Well, that's the whole thing is just like nobody has friggin' seen it unless they saw the one in Wacken a couple of years ago, which is totally different.
Right.
That festival, the heavy metal festival. And, I think that the comments that I see most are just like, oh, I've seen the real Dio. I'm good,
Right,
and
which is not helpful. Yeah, it's like, then fine, then be good and shut up. Like, we don't care what you have to say.
Yeah, or this is just a cash grab by his widow, which is like, I mean, of course, all these guys are doing it to get a paycheck, but I mean, it's just like I feel like everybody from the guy that put the hologram together, because I heard recently an interview with Simon Wright, who's the drummer on this, which basically the whole backing band is like Dio's backing band from before he passed away.
Yeah,
And
that's the guitarist. That's the same good. And I apologize, I don't know his name, but that's the same guy that we saw when we saw him at the Strand, right?
yeah, Craig Goldie.
Yep.
Actually, not the bass players, and I think it's I can't remember the bass player, but he wasn't originally with Dio, I don't think. But the point being is that they talk about how it's like it's a tribute, it's an honor to his music to help keep it alive. It's
Right.
you know, they're doing it with like a lot of passion and love, and like, and of course even Wendy Dio herself said like don't judge it until you've seen it, like shit all over it, but like, you know, shit all over it after you've seen it and don't like it.
Right. And I mean, how is it a cash grab? I mean, it's just like they're
To
trying
capitalize on, you know, I mean, it's just like,
no,
all
I
right.
get how people would think that, but like, what are they supposed to do? Just like forget it. Let's pretend he never existed and move on. Like, I mean,
Yeah,
it's
but you think if somebody was going to do a cash grab, they do something like a little bit more popular. I mean, let's face it. I mean, it's just like you're
right.
going to get a lot more cash by doing anybody other than Dio, because he's got his loyal following. But I mean, it's just like I don't know. I just think that you know, people should approach this as give it a chance and look at it as just any other kind of like you know, theatrical presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Or a tribute or something. Like, I mean, what are some of the other things? Like, I mean, like the first thing that it makes me think of is like Elvis impersonators, or like the
Sure.
Beatlemania, or like,
Yep.
you know, any of that kind of stuff that just pays tribute to the original, uh, you know, kind of idea of like what, you know, a band was about or something like that. I mean, this is new technology too. I mean, it's cool. I mean, you know, would it be cool to like see this, and if it takes off, like you could be like, yeah, I was there at the first like heavy metal like hologram show.
Yeah, I mean, it is, and they said they've made a ton of improvements on the holograms. I don't even know how this stuff works. Like, I hear about these happening. I know they did one with what, Tupac?
A
There was
while
one,
ago, a
was there
long
one with,
time ago.
did they do one with Zappa?
Maybe, I think, I don't know.
There's been a few of them, and I honestly can't fathom. I'd be really interested to hear your take after seeing it, because even looking at this picture here, I don't understand what I'm looking at. Like, I get it, but
Yeah.
I can't imagine what it actually looks like to be there.
Yeah, I feel like I don't know, you'd have to, yeah, I'll definitely have to let you know what it looks like in person. But I do know that, say, like the screens behind them and everything like that. I mean, I did usually like I kind of like saw a set list, but I didn't look because I don't like to see that kind of thing. I also stay away from YouTube videos. I did the same thing with the new Kiss show because I didn't want to see anything ahead of time. I wanted to go in fresh, but I did cheat for like a couple of minutes because I was curious. And it's like, there is some cool stuff and projections going on in the background, like some visual stuff,
Mm-hmm.
which I kind of spoiled for myself. But, you know, just like I said, a minute or two. But on video, like, I mean, you can't look at a YouTube video and judge it because it does like look like this. It looks like you're watching like a movie screen. So it's like you can't get that 3D effect like how it was intended to be presented theatrically unless you're there in person. So
Right.
I just think that, you know, give it a chance. I'm excited to see it. I think it'll be cool. I mean, if nothing else, it's a fun night out.
Yeah, I mean, worst case scenario, listening to some Dio songs. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. What's that? I mean, if you love Dio, it's just like, what are you gonna be like? This sucks. It's just like, no, it doesn't. It's like it's Dio's vocals and his band playing Dio songs.
yeah, you're
Like,
listening to Dio. You're seeing the members of his band.
I mean, you know, unless they're all playing out of tune,
Well, I mean, when we went to go see Dio those years ago, were we poking Dio? Like, no, like, I mean, I get it, but like, if Dio was still alive and this was around, you'd be like, I'd rather see the real thing.
yeah,
But he's not. He's passed on, and this is a way to honor him. So,
yeah,
I'm all for it.
cool.
There's
Well, I'll
another.
let you know. Let you know
Yeah,
next.
I look forward to hearing about it. There's the hologram itself, I guess. There he is in all his glory in his Knights Templar shirt or whatever that is.
Yeah. Yeah, apparently like I did a little bit of research on it. And I guess that they designed the hologram like it's not actually Ronnie. It's like an actor mimicking the movements. Kind of like how they would do like
Like a screen capture, yeah.
yeah, like animation and stuff like that. And like even Wendy Dio was like, she was very picky about how his eyebrows were drawn on and stuff like that. Like even like little things, or like she didn't want his likeness to be from like the 70s. So they got
It's like him, what he would look like now.
Yeah, or closer to what he looked like maybe in his probably like maybe I'm guessing they took it from like early 2000s, something like that.
Did they get Andy Serkis to do the to do the motion capture? That would have been great.
Oh man.
He's the king of that. Also in the news, Ronnie James Dio documentary coming out. Did you hear that?
Yes.
They're starting this documentary. So Wendy Dio has got a busy year ahead of her, and I'd assume they're probably trying to get it ready for the 10-year anniversary of his passing, which will be about a year from now.
Yeah, probably. And I had heard that I think it was Eddie Trunk had asked if they were. Maybe it was Eddie Trunk, or was something where I read maybe an interview. I can't remember because it's like it all mushes together in my head. But would she ever consider having like a Dio like biopic? Because I mean, he had a very like long and interesting life, and you talk about Deep Purple doing different things. Like I mean, you see Ronnie as you do here, and you see his beginnings and everything. He was like wearing like a button-up suit and singing in doo-wop bands.
Yeah.
When he started out and everything, and she's like, no, like I don't want to do that. She's just like she wants to do like a documentary. Like she thinks that would be the better way to honor him, because
there's been so many of these biopics, and I'm probably not one to speak because I haven't really seen any of them, but I'm just like I'm not super excited to see any of them.
Yeah.
I would prefer a documentary, you know what I mean? Like instead of, I don't want to say sensationalizing, but instead of like making it fit into a neat package for a movie for the dramatic element and the suspense and all that, people's lives don't work that way. And to see like something with interviews with people that knew him and interviews from him in the past, I think that would be more interesting to me anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's what she's in touch with too. Wendy Dio is that fans like guys like us would rather see that than like something like the Queen movie, which or the Motley Crue movie, which I mean, as cool as those things are, I mean, I saw both of them. I liked them. But for somebody like Dio, I think that she knows the fan base well enough to know that we would rather see a documentary, like you said, with like excerpts of like, interviews from him, like never before like heard like demos and stuff like that. Because I mean, she's got all that stuff and is like planning on doing stuff with it. And that's what we'd rather have than like a fictionalized version of.
Have you seen the Jason Becker documentary?
No.
It's really good. Just kind of talking about his whole, his past and growing up, and
I feel like that would be really interesting.
Incredible player, and then he gets stricken with ALS, and where that takes him, and just the fact that he didn't let that stop him making music. It's just really, it's inspiring, it's heartwarming, it's heartbreaking, it's it's very interesting, and it's it's not a biopic. It's him doing interviews. It's his parents. It's people that played with him. It's, Marty Friedman's in there. All the people that were important with his development as an artist. It's great. It's called Not Dead Yet, I believe.
Yes, I think I've heard of it. Yeah.
Because I think he was supposed to die, 20 years ago, and he's still going.
Yeah.
It's very, very impressive. So the last thing we got in the news is an interview with Ian Gillan, which I thought was pretty cool. They were, all of these websites or people try to interview Ian Gillan and try to get, like they'll always ask the same questions or be like, what do you think about, would you ever get back with Richie Blackmore and play a show? All these questions that he's probably heard 1,000 times. But they were asking him about new music, like what kind, like do you have any comments on new music? Probably so they could get a clickbait headline like, oh, Ian Gillan doesn't like Macklemore or whatever. I don't know. I don't know what the kids are listening to these days. But instead, he said, no, I steer clear of that, and for good reason. When I was in my formative years, I rejected Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby, Andy Williams, and Dean Martin. I now realize they were all great artists, but at the time, as a young man, you have to clear the decks. there's this sort of psychological vandalism that takes place for yourself. I'm in that position now. I need to step aside. My uncle was a jazz pianist, and I remember that when we did Deep Purple and Rock, he ran from the room screaming, saying, I can't hear anything. I can't hear any instruments. I was rubbing my hands together going, great. I had upset the previous generation and a man I highly respected. I don't think it's right to pass comment. He said, the only advice I give those is to absorb as much as you can from a wide spectrum as you can. And then he goes on to say a few more words, but I thought it was pretty cool, that, they're probably trying to get him. I saw an interview with like Moby recently where he's like, no good music has come out since 1984. And it's like, oh, come on, Moby. Like, what? And this was before all the recent stuff about Moby came out. So, but like, I hate that kind of attitude. Like, oh, they don't make good music anymore, which is just such a bunch of crap. Like, they've always made good music. They'll always make good music.
It's a really old man way of thinking,
Right, it is. And that's coming from you, who's been an old man since like 7th grade.
But it's a get off my lawn type of mentality. You kids. And I mean, yeah, I admit that I feel the same way. I'm just like, but I'm not saying there's no good music. It's just there's no music now that interests me. But I mean, I could be wrong. Yeah, I mean, I could hear something that's out now.
You just got the latest. You just got the latest Whitesnake album, which came out this year. I mean, granted, it's an old band, but like, there's always new stuff coming out, and like you can just shut your mind to it and say, oh, nothing good ever comes out now.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard like maybe of. I mean, I admit I don't get out and hear a lot of new original, like young bands, original music or whatever. But I mean, I've heard some things within the past few years. So I'm like, wow, that's really good. And I mean, it's just like if you go to live shows and if you like just pick up new music, or if you just talk to friends or meet people and they're just like, oh, have you heard of this band? Have you heard this or whatever? It's like you'll find stuff now that's good. But I mean, to make a blanket statement like no good music has come out since the 80s or whatever, then you're just like, I don't know, you're an idiot. It's like, I mean, I'm sorry, but you are. I mean, there's always good music.
Of course, yeah.
Be it old bands or, young new bands. I mean, just go to YouTube.
So when this episode comes out, we will be in the week of June 10th through the 16th. And that week in Deep Purple history, we've got a few landmark items. First is June 12th was the day in 1969 was the day that Hallelujah was secretly recorded.
Yeah, behind Rod and Nicky's back.
Rod and Nicky. Every time we got it. So that's great. And also,
I'm sorry.
It's the pilgrim hat gets you every time.
Yeah.
Roger Glover with the pilgrim hat. So on June 15th, 1973, Tony Edwards, one of the managers, notifies Roger Glover that Ritchie wants him out of the band because he's already lined up Glenn Hughes to take his place, and he wants Roger out, which is kind of depressing because I love Roger Glover, but I also love Glenn Hughes, so it's a very tricky thing. Then, interestingly enough, June 10th, 1982, Rainbow releases Straight Between the Eyes. And this is before Deep Purple reunites in Mark II form. And what's interesting about that is who plays bass on Straight Between the Eyes?
Roger Glover.
And who produces it? Roger Glover.
Roger Glover.
So it's interesting. He's like, I want him out of the band. And then he's like, now I'm going to start a band and have him in the band. It's this very weird relation. I always found it hard to understand how Roger Glover and Ritchie Blackmore just kept coming back together like that.
I don't know. I feel like I kind of understand Ritchie a little bit because I'm the same way. Like I'll just like curse somebody out and then just be their friend again. Be a very difficult, weird personality type. That's that. It's like screw him, and then like like a couple of years later, it's like, well, let's be in a band. I don't know.
And could you produce my album too while we're at it?
But let's talk about that album cover though. That's kind of one of the crappiest album covers I've seen.
Let me put it back up there. It's not the greatest.
I don't know. I just think that anything where like there's an illustration with like, a part of a guitar in it is kind of hokey. Because it's just kind of like a guitar crashing through in between somebody's eyes, like metal, like I don't know.
Yeah, this has kind of got like a fistful of metal vibe to it. Although that was a few years later and a little more violent. But yeah, it's weird. Like you see the rainbow reflecting in the eyeball, and the person's head is apparently made of something ceramic, and it's a weird. Yeah, it's a weird out. It's not their best work.
No, I mean if you go from like
Cover-wise.
yeah, I mean if you go from like the album artwork to like Rainbow Rising to this, it's just like you see like even Rainbow, it's just a like black like Times New Roman font or something. It's like what the hell, who decided on that? Richie's just like, let the art department figure it out. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
While I wear my Abe Lincoln hat or whatever it is. Pilgrim hat.
Oh.
Wait, I don't think he was wearing the Pilgrim hat in the 80s.
That's a good question. Was he?
No, I think he gave it up for the. Yeah, I think since the 80s, I think he might have been wearing a. I think I'm suspicious that he might be wearing a wig because his hair's the same now as it was then.
He's got kind of like the Paul McCartney syndrome. Well, Paul McCartney recently finally allowed his hair to have a little gray in it. Even though it's probably 100% gray at this point. He's like 75 or whatever. But yeah, like he was like dyeing it like 100% like brown, like up until like just a couple of years ago. It's like, you're not fooling anybody, buddy.
Good for him. Yeah, same with Travolta. Did you see that recently? He embraced his baldness.
Oh yeah, he shaved his head. Oh, well, did you see like a picture with him with Kiss?
Yeah, that's how I saw it because he was what the hell was he singing? Were they singing the Grease soundtrack together or something? I can't remember.
Might have been something weird.
They were doing something weird together, and I saw that, and then I went down this John Travolta rabbit hole, and I was just like, oh man, look at that. And you know what? I get it. Like, has nothing to do with the podcast, but props to him for like just embracing like the fact that he's a friggin' bald mofo. It looks much better on him than all those like wigs and the hair plugs or whatever the hell he was doing before.
Doesn't quite balance out the whole Scientology aspect, but
well, that's a discussion for another day.
But yeah, as far as a look, it's a much better look.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got a treat for you for our Deep Purple Deep Track of the day. I feel like we should probably have jingles for these, huh? It's the Deep Purple Deep Track or something.
Deep Purple Deep Track.
There you go. We'll have to do some like 4-part harmonies. So today's Deep Track is coming to you. It's a band called Fancy.
Well, when you say it like that, who's that over on the end, Lemmy?
That over on the end is most likely
on the right.
On the right?
Yeah.
That's most likely Les Binks.
Oh.
I believe.
In the night. In the city. Alone in my room.
So this is a band called Fancy. This song is called Touch Me.
And who is in this band?
So Les Binks is in this band, as we know from Judas Priest, the early Judas Priest recordings, and he was also prominently featured in the Wizards Convention. The vocals are by Helen Kant, who is a former Penthouse model. So she was in this band, I guess, for the recording, but then they realized, well, we can kind of make her sound good in the studio, but we're going on the road, and they replaced her with Annie Kavanaugh, who was a singer who performed actually live with Jesus Christ Superstar. She was on the road with Jesus Christ Superstar. On bass, we've got Mo Foster, also of Wizards Convention and Butterfly Ball fame.
Cool.
And then on guitar, on the left, do you recognize him? You see that puffy hair? That is Mr. Ray Fenwick
Okay. I wasn't going to get it.
from Ian Gillan Band. He was the guitarist on John Lord's Windows, as we talked about earlier, and then he was also in the Spencer Davis Group, who are great. It's one of Eddie Hardin's previous outings. So kind of an interesting band here.
Yeah, that is kind of a very unique lineup.
Of some, a few different tangentially related. Les Binks played on Wizards Convention with John Lord and all them, and Mo Foster. Mo Foster is credited as being in the Butterfly Ball doing the finger snaps. So that's but he had to have been doing something else, right? They wouldn't have just brought him in just for that, unless he was just maybe he was dropped somebody off to the studio that day.
Well, they just
he gave Mickey Lee Soul a ride to the studio, and he's like, hey Mo, we need one more set of finger snaps. All right. I don't even remember any finger snaps on the Butterfly Ball, but.
Or they just looked at his hand and they're just like, those are the fattest fingers I've seen. Let me hear you snap, kid.
I think you're gonna go places.
You're gonna go places with them sausage links. Did Old Blind Mole have finger snaps on it?
Oh, you're right. Old Blind Mole. That must have been it.
There you go.
Those are the sweet sausage fingers of Mo Foster.
And I have no idea if he has fat fingers. I'm just wondering what makes somebody's fingers desirable to use them for snapping.
I wonder if they just he came in the studio and they caught they just saw his fingers. Oh, wait, hey, take those things out for a second.
Unholster those bad boys.
Just on sight, they knew. Oh, this is gonna be gold. Give those puppies a snap for me.
Take those puppies for a spin.
Oh well. On that note, I think we should call it quits for episode 7, Concerto for Group and Orchestra. It's been a blast listening to that again with you, and
yeah, it was, and I look forward to next week when we get to start on the big one.
Yeah, the big one
in rock. Can't wait.
That's going to be great. Well, until next week, then we'll talk to you later.
Ciao.
Thank you for listening to the Deep Purple Podcast. If you like what you hear and would like more episodes in the future, please donate on Patreon to support the show. You can also give us a rating on iTunes to help new people discover the show. You can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook for show updates. See deeppurplepodcast.com for more details. Thank you for listening.